Thank you, Juan. That was beautiful. And what an extraordinary way to begin our worship service this morning with two of Dr. King's favorite hymns. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Urbana-Champaign. My name is Reverend Karen Bush, and I am your consulting lead minister here at UUCUC. And I'm so glad to be here with you this morning, streaming live from our beautiful sanctuary here on Green Street in Urbana on this brisk but sunny winter's day. It's good to be together with the beautiful, sacred variety of individuals and identities that make each person here unique and vitally important to us. Just for you being you. Just as you are, in person or online, the connection is real, and so is the love. Our congregation's mission is to build community, seek inspiration, promote justice, and find peace. We are a church of many different theologies that values deeds above creeds. We are a church that strives to build beloved community in the here and now. If you want to follow along with the written order of service, you can find that link just below this video on our website. And if you want to chat with your fellow UUCU members, you can find the live stream chat box on our YouTube page. Remember that because we're live, there's still time to make your own contributions to our shared joys and sorrows later in the service. To do that, just email your message to joysandsorrows@uucuc.org. Monday, tomorrow, is the day our nation has chosen to be set apart in different ways to honor the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. We will be seeking to do so also in today's worship service. This is an extremely important occasion, and we are so glad that you chose to be with us. You will want to know that 3 of the 4 pieces of music we will be enjoying today were chosen specifically for the meanings they held for Dr. King and his family. Juan has already brought us the beautiful, beautiful melodies of Dr. King's favorite hymns, Precious Lord, and There Is a Balm in Gilead, which Juan transposed and created something so special for us all, didn't he? I chose our postlude today entitled Going Home from the Largo of the Symphony from the New World, number 95, by Anton Dvorak, because this was the song Dr. King's family chose to be the postlude of Dr. King's funeral. As you listen to the music today, I invite you to let your spirit take it all in. Hear and feel and be. Together, we can hold the knowledge that Dr. King loved these songs so much and found great solace and strength for the living of his days, the walking of his path, and for his faith. Finally, musically, our choir director, Benjamin, with his beautiful voice, will be leading us along with our amazing accompanist, Juan, who we already heard from, who will be playing UUCUC's magnificent organ here in the sanctuary for the hymn entitled We Would Be One. It's a recording, but they played it here. This is number 318, found in our hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition. As a congregation, this in our Living Tradition hymnal. This is a deeply you hymn whose lyrics and beautiful tune beckon us individually and as a congregation to dare to keep working, to keep reaching, to keep striving and dreaming for, as the song says, a nobler world than we have known. I know I will be emotional listening to it. I invite you to be present as we hear it. I want to thank our worship associate, Jim Hannon, who's here with us this morning, and it's awesome to have Jim in the sanctuary today. Jim is our congregational chair of the racial justice team. This is a remarkable group of people who continue to work together to nudge, to invite, to push sometimes as needed, and to inspire all of us to the work that is ours in order to help create the possibility of a more just world, a more just future, a more just now for everyone. Our coordinator of religious exploration and engagement, Rose St. Clair, is going to talk with us in a few minutes about the juxtaposition of love and fear. Of love and fear in our lives. A message that will get to the very heart of the invitation and challenge of what today's theme is all about. Rose's sharing is a vital, important part of this morning's invitation to look at ourselves, to look at our fears, look at our capacity to love in new ways, as later in the service we will all be invited to commit to new next steps in the work for racial justice. I continue to be grateful for Rose's insights and sensitivities, which serve to make every Time for All Ages a message that speaks deeply to the inner child inside all of us, whatever our age. So thank you, Rose, for today and for all of the Sundays that you're with us. Today, we will be offered also an extraordinary gift. As UUCUC member Joe Omo Osagi shares with all of us how, as Joe puts it, after 20 years of living in the United States, identifying as an immigrant, he became a Black man in America. It happened the moment he first held his newborn son, and nothing was the same ever again. In the midst of such a personal and tender story, Joe's words offer a haunting window into the pervasiveness and the toxicity of racism in our country, as he offers also a powerful and personal challenge to each of us. And finally, this morning, I will be offering a message that will carry my own thoughts and challenge around our theme of the day, America's original sin, confronting the racist within. A theme that I have held close in my heart and a message that has been brewing in my core for many years, waiting for that right time, that right place, the right heart, which today I will finally offer in full form to you. I want to add here, I'm proud of this church. This church, which has been striving to work for racial justice in so many ways for so many years. I've known you all my life, and I've watched all my life. The challenges brought in today's service do not negate or dismiss any of this. We are simply talking about next steps. Where do we go from here? How do we move away from the fear that we were so carefully taught as children? And how do we open our hearts and our lives even more to love? So thank you in advance for your openness, for your courage, for your willingness, your determination to walk together on this radical path of personal and social evolution. You may want to know that our service is going to go a little longer today. I predict possibly 20-25 minutes, past an hour. I share this with you now so that you're not caught off guard and can plan accordingly. I didn't want to cut any part short. I tried. I went over it and I tried, but each part seemed exactly as it should be, including our longer than usual music for meditation and offertory. And I hope when all is said and done, you will agree. So get yourself a cup of coffee, or like Avalon and I both love, a chai tea latte or hot tea of some kind, and find a relaxing chair, maybe wrapped up in a soft blanket, and nestle in as together we explore. And let us continue on with today's service as we seek to honor the anniversary of the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This congregation chooses to begin every Sunday with a formal acknowledgement of the indigenous nations of this land. It is a practice that connects us to the history of this place and our own responsibilities as stewards and members of a wider community. Wherever you are listening from today, please bring to mind the indigenous peoples of your place and the histories of where you are. There will be a moment of silence. Make it a longer one. After the acknowledgement, and in that silence, I invite you to consider how specifically you might amplify the voices or contribute in some way support to the Native activists this coming week. We recognize and acknowledge that we gather together today on Indigenous land, land taken through deception, coercion, and violence. We acknowledge the continued displacement and oppression of Indigenous communities, and we lift up Native commitments to survival, identity, and the protection of this world. Thank you. Jim now will lead us in the lighting of our chalice.
As Unitarian Universalists, we light a chalice each Sunday at the start of the service that marks this time as special and sacred. Please join me in the words of the chalice lighting that you'll find on the bottom of your screen. As we kindle this flame, we reignite our commitment to our congregational mission to build community, seek inspiration, promote justice, and find peace.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rose St. Clair, and I'm the Coordinator for Religious Exploration and Engagement here at UUCUC. This morning, I would like to talk to you about fear. What does it feel like to feel fear or to be afraid? For me, it means my heart starts racing, my body gets hot, my hands might get shaky and sweaty. And fear isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it makes a lot of sense to be afraid and to feel fear. If I'm out on one of my daily walks and I come across a mountain lion, I'm probably going to feel afraid. And that fear is what's going to tell me I'm going to fight this mountain lion. Or more likely, I'm going to try to run and get away from this mountain lion. And that would make sense. But over time, we learn and we're taught to interpret what we see. And sometimes we are taught to see mountain lions where there are no mountain lions. Maybe we see mountain lions when they're really just kittens. And so we're seeing this kitten and we're having that feeling of, I'm going to fight this kitten, or I'm going to run and get away from this kitten. But what must it feel like to be that kitten who is being looked at and seen and treated like a mountain lion? So today, I want to challenge you to think about, when are you feeling fear? Why are you feeling fear? Are you seeing a mountain lion where there is no mountain lion? And maybe there's really just a kitten.
Hey, Joe, thanks for
Yes.
meeting with me today and
Okay.
talking about race on this Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. birthday weekend. And again, thank you for willing to just open your heart and your spirit and your mind and just talk to me. Talk to me, Joe. What do you want to tell us? What do you want us to tell us?
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the first place I worked as almost full-time was at Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School in Urbana, Illinois, which is kind of like an international school. I enjoyed that experience immensely, but I also enjoyed being able to come back to the school as Santa Claus, since this is a time of year also. However, in my readings and getting to know Dr. King from that time and prior to that time, because growing up in Lagos, Nigeria, I remember hearing the I Have a Dream speech probably in 1970, 71 on an LP. So I have history. I mean, I listened to the I Have a Dream speech on LP, and then eventually working at a place called King School almost 20 years later was really impactful in my life, because I mean, I grew up in a family of academics. So people come into our home bringing an LP and playing that I Have a Dream speech was meaningful to me. I mean, listening to James Brown on the same record player saying "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud" also was very impactful. But the whole idea of race and racism did not really start resonating with me till the last, I would say, 20 years. Prior to that, I just saw myself as an immigrant in America, working with American children, Black, white, or otherwise, trying to figure out this American dream or this American ideal or this American journey, because America is kind of a weird place. We have these things, we have these dreams that people around the world look at and say, this is a beautiful place to be. That you get here, it is a beautiful place to be. However, it is a difficult place to be if you are not a white person or a white man with that privilege. And so it changes the dynamic, it changes the picture. And I really did not really start thinking of it as impactful as that till our children were born, till I realized I was going to have two young men who will be recognized as Black men in America 18 years ago. TJ is going to be 19 this coming year. David is going to be 15 this coming year. And I did not really start thinking about it as that important, maybe because I was not just really thinking about its impact, because I said, okay, how does it impact me personally? Yeah, I can navigate it, but how does it impact my children? Then it became a little bit much more, almost a desperation that I got to do something. I got to be much more vested in how to see we can make a difference. And that's been my journey. I mean, the title of my book, I think I told Florence this, that if I were ever to really pen my own personal memoir, it would be how I became a Black man in today's America. Because till 18 years ago, I was just an immigrant African in the United States. But I started becoming a Black man in America when our children were born. And I started realizing that there was a little bit of a difference, and really started taking some of the principles of Dr. King and Malcolm X and all the different luminaries in this struggle for equity into being, and saying, okay, how do I make sure TJ and David are not just seen as an asterisk in American society? And so that's been part of my journey, and that's been part of this progression over the last 18 years. I've been in the United States 40 years, but that progression really took hold about 18 years ago when I held TJ in my arms for the first time, crying and saying, hey, this is my son. I mean, and oh yeah, this is my son. And America sometimes isn't very kind to men like him.
You mentioned, Joe, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing so openly. And you mentioned, if I take you back for a moment to Dr. King talked about this American dream, and you'd heard about this American dream, but you said that American dream isn't the same if you're not you said a white person, but and a white male. I wondered, when you think about your two boys growing up, are there conversations that you find yourself having with them about this reality that possibly, a white father wouldn't have with his white sons, or whatever the gender, gender,
Oh, definitely. I mean, I did not really even think about having, those are not conversations I would have had if I were in Nigeria, right? Because it would all be the same. I mean, yes, there was a small white population in Nigeria, but they're not the dominant group. Yes, they might have wealth, but they're not the dominant group. But in America, I started to realize as I became a parent and also working in social services for the last 35 years that, wow, there is a difference. There is a difference in how how people react to me and how they would react to my sons. My TJ is driving. He's been driving 2 years now. And yes, having that conversation with him, said, hey, if you're ever stopped, please make sure your hands are in the right position. No quick movements, no, all those types of things that I did not even think about it till I became much more Americanized in how I viewed my Blackness. Because my Blackness was always my Africanness, because I say, okay, people hear me speak and say, well, you don't sound American. And so, yes, that was one of the things. I did not sound American. So sometimes I was given the benefit of the doubt. And also, I am so Black, I'm almost blue. Black folks would know that, what I'm talking about. But my complexion is really richer, much darker than the average African-American who has been here for generations. And so there is that aspect of me also that sometimes we don't want to talk about in mixed company. But with my son, with TJ, definitely talking to him about it. With David, definitely talking to him about it. Both of them have had their run-ins with issues of race on the periphery. And I remember I was using a quick example of TJ texting me from class. And I said, hey, dude, don't use your phone in class and all that stuff. But he texted me from class because he was in school, in high school at that time. And I think it was a consumer ed class or something like that. He was taking an elective. And the teacher was going off about Colin Kaepernick taking a knee. And TJ said something, and the teacher was not very pleased about it. And TJ asked, could I keep saying something about this in class? I said, go for it. I got your back. I'm supportive of you. And he went ahead and addressed it with the teacher. The next exam, TJ is a bright kid. He ended up having a D in the exam. I said, that ain't right. That wasn't right. And so
being punished.
Yes, he was punished for it. And I don't think, because TJ's name, this is the longest, another part of the story, but TJ's name changed from Negromo Osage to Black. And so he just thought TJ Black was just TJ Black, an American kid without the impact of education behind him. From my far side of the family, education has been part of our lives for the last 100 years. But Diana and I showed up at the school for a meeting with a teacher, with the assistant principal. By the end of the meeting, TJ had an A in that exam because he kept on changing. So, oh yeah, he got it right here. He got it right here. And I think he did not think that I would be able to articulate, or Diana and I would be able to articulate that, hey, this is, for lack of a better word, yeah, that's kind of a little racist. Not a little racist, a lot of racist.
And being right on every level.
Yeah, and he did not think there would be an accountability there, because just another Black kid from the end, and so
his parents wouldn't know any better or whatever, go ahead.
And yeah, and those are things that have happened that they've been impacted. I mean, like David was in a math class when he was in public school also, and he has a tendency to he does a lot of he does math in his head. He does algebra in his head, and I don't know how he does do that. He does that. He does that and does it very effectively. And he was in an accelerated mathematics class in the 7th grade, and the teacher would put a problem on the board, and he would speak out of turn. He would just yell out the answer. The teacher said, "Hey, you're cheating." He said, "No, how come I'm cheating?" I mean, because he said no one else can get that answer that quickly. He said, "Well, he did." And so Diana brought home some of the same problems and said, hey, "Okay, let's see how you do it." And Diana would try to write the problems out and try to work it out, and David would get answers before she finishes writing the problem.
He's just brilliant.
Very bright kid.
And you were saying not given the benefit. Something you said I want to bring back to, and here maybe an example of not being given the benefit of the doubt. You said that when folks would hear your accent, maybe see that there's, for those who might understand, a hue to your skin that is more implies an African, a more close African heritage, people would give you the benefit of the doubt versus something they would not give a man who's African American Black. And would you, something that as someone who's been listening to the stories of African American men for some decades, just as a listener journeying along, I hear time and again talking about the experience of being, the assumption of being a criminalized, and whether male or female, but especially Black men, just by the color of the skin, that here is a criminal. And I wondered, and that's something that, anyway, I would toss that ball back at you. If there's something that, when you said the benefit of the doubt, is that part of what you were talking about, Joe?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, what I'm talking about is that, okay, I start to speak and say, okay, he's not one of them. And
them being a gangster, a less educated, or
all those attributes that have been placed on the African American in this society, and placed on my sons in this society. And that's what I am fighting against. And that's what I am trying to get people to recognize. I mean, I think I've had conversations with people in our church who say sometimes that I bring up racism too much. No, I'm not. Racism is America's original sin. I mean, I grew up Catholic, and I know about original sin. And in the whole idea of original sin, it's almost like we have never really come to the truth and reconciliation, going back to Desmond Tutu, and the truth and reconciliation about how our people were enslaved in this culture. And now we just say, oh, stop talking about race, just move on.
Let's move on.
All these rules, we've passed all these laws.
Doesn't impact me. Yeah.
So let's move on. Why are you guys belly aching over this crap? And that is not okay. It's racism is, I mean, individuals are racist and our systems are racist. We can change individual minds, but the system moves very slowly. And like the individual teachers that have affected my sons are individually biased, individually maybe racist. However, they still work within a system that identifies our sons as not being good enough.
Not being educated, not being able to tell me what you think of this. Something over the years, as some rooms I've been in, and we've talked about the definition of racism. This has been in campus ministry where people of all kinds of cultures, colors, backgrounds have gotten together and just struggling with this. And the definition that bubbled out was racism is prejudice plus power. That every human being has prejudice. That's one of the bias is just the bottom line, whatever. We can unpack that, and that's a whole nother story. But when one's prejudice has the power of the culture and the system, that is racism. That becomes racism. And that is something that I appreciate that this church has talked about, had conversations about. One of the things that has been my own personal journey is coming to terms, being pushed to come to terms, and I'm grateful for that, though it hasn't been easy over these years, of how much I am part of the problem by being white, and how and I am that the best gift, the most important work I can do is to go deep inside. And that's why the title for today's service is America's Original Sin, Confronting the Racist Within, meaning the racist within everyone in our congregation who is identified and identifies as European descent, i.e. they're white. And let me stop there, because I'll have other remarks about that later. How does that hit you when you hear the definition of racism is, let me toss this in there too. So many of my colleagues who are African-American, Black, would come to the meeting that was here in Champaign, and they would take a deep breath and say, okay, I made it past south of I-80. This was in the 80s and 90s. And I imagine they would still might say the same thing, that to come south of I-80 was frightening for these well-dressed, well-spoken, well-educated, solidly middle class, possibly upper middle class folk who are American citizens, that it was frightening to drive south of I-80 for having the sign of being Black, let alone driving through. Of course, we have many sundown towns. I'm from a sundown town of Philo. My relatives are from sundown towns where you could not, it's against the law to be Black after sundown. Anyway, I wonder, when you hear that definition of racism as prejudice plus power, and the whole concept of that it can be scary to be caught being Black. How does that, what comes to you when you hear that?
I mean, what comes to mind is that, I think a lot of times, being Black in America means that almost like you have a target on your back. But the thing is that, yes, being an educated Black man in a town such as Champaign-Urbana, you get recognized, you'll be fine. But you move outside of Champaign-Urbana, 10 miles east, north, or south, that it changes. That there is a change in how you're viewed. Yes, you're educated there, but I'm going to doubt who you are. I'll use the Kyle Rittenhouse example. My son and Kyle Rittenhouse are the same age. I cannot imagine TJ at 17 carrying an AR-15, walking down the streets without him being arrested or killed before he kills anyone. Rittenhouse, that is power and prejudice. All white men can be deputized a whole lot easier than I would ever be deputized, or TJ or David would ever be deputized to carry a gun openly like that. And I think that is to say, oh, but he was being attacked. He was in a that is power and privilege. And it's not just because of it's because of his whiteness, but also because of how the system identifies him as a potentially good person, while I am identified as a potentially bad person. My 6'4", 200-pound son carrying anything that resembles a gun will not make it out alive. And that is what I talk about, that Tamir Rice, when he was killed, looked like my son did at age 12. And the police showed up, and 5 seconds later, Tamir Rice was dead. And people say, well, racism, we talk too much about racism. But those are individuals who are supported by the system. And it's a systemic racism that keeps us all trapped. Individuals are racist. The system supports those individuals. Yeah. And that's the difficulty that we face, because the system moves at a glacial speed very slowly. Yes, it has changed since the Civil Rights Act of 1965 was passed. But looking at what's happening today, how many states have passed laws that are going to affect voting this coming year in 22, or this year in 2022, because of the fear of the loss of power. America wants to hold on to the last vestiges of white power. And so that's why the laws are changing. That's why a lot of states want to change the laws to say, no, we can't have this happen any longer. It's saying secretaries of state can change voter outcomes in several states in the union. That is racism, but we're not addressing it. We can all turn out and vote, but if the Secretary of State in Georgia decides that, you know what, I don't like what happened and I'm going to change it, the Supreme Court has said it's okay because it changed the Voting Rights Act. So those are things that, Dr. King was radical. By the time he died, he was the most hated man in America. Yes, we're whitewashing him, saying he was all about peace, that Dr. King wouldn't like critical race theory. No, Dr. King was asking people to be accountable. Go read the letter from a Birmingham jail talking about the white liberals. Say, guys, get off your butts and do something. Yeah. And
thank you. I wish we had hours to talk, and we will. You and I will. You and I will.
We will.
You and I will. And we'll be back. And we'll be back on camera for the church. Also, I wondered, as bringing this to a temporary close just for this conversation, because all you've been saying is so powerful and so personal. I appreciate it, Joe. If you what would you like to say to your church? Mm-hmm. When you think of your boys, I think of my future grandbabies, mm-hmm. who are going to look like you, mm-hmm. more than me. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, my claws, mm-hmm. think of all my students, mm-hmm. who are students of color, who tell me about being followed around Walmart, mm-hmm. Or being turned down to be able to rent an apartment. not been able to borrow notes from others in class. But this, I want to ask you, what would you like to say? What would you like to say to the others in the church as a kind of a final, a word of challenge and a word of blessing? I'm putting you on the spot. A word of challenge and a word of blessing.
It wouldn't be a word. It'd be, I mean, might sound a little crass, but use your damn privilege. You have a privilege. You see it happening, you say something. You see it, you hear something, you say something. Use your privilege, because I mean, I would say to my white wife, use your privilege, because I know sometimes when we travel, if I go into the hotel, it's going to be a little bit different, especially when we're traveling south. So you go in and ask. You go in without a boys and get our rooms, so that things will be different. Because when I go in and get the rooms, it's a little different.
Use the church to use the privilege. And from what I've known about this church, they've been trying. They've been trying.
Oh, yeah.
They've been working at it.
I appreciate it.
But there's a lot of work to do yet. There's a lot of work to do for the sake of your boys, for the sake of everyone's children, for everyone's grandkids now and in the future. Thank you, Joe. Thank you. On this Dr. King's birthday, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. birthday, for coming on camera, for looking at your church, looking all of us in the eye and saying all that you've shared today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I will keep the conversation going, and come and talk to me. Anybody. I mean, I happen to be wearing this.
Let's see. Yeah, I'm glad you're showing that, because I couldn't see it. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And there you go.
And I did not wear it on purpose. It just happened to be under my sweatshirt. And here you go. Because if we don't take care of it here, and then Desmond Tutu just passed away, he was a living legacy of Dr. King. And those are the things that we have to be aware of, and we need to keep working towards.
Every one of us,
every one of us.
Conversation I'd like to have with the congregation after you and I close and be on and live on From the Pulpit, is the challenge for each of us to look deep in ourselves, to recognize the ways that we are personally not the safe space that we need to keep growing to be. That we personally, yes, we use our privilege, but that also we don't reach over and lock that car door because the person walking by is Black. That, but to be honest, honest conversation about the fear, about the impact of being raised with the influence of white supremacy, with our privilege. And that's a conversation that will be ongoing also, to become a truly safe space as we act and use our privilege and use the power to make a difference, and so that everyone has that. Joe, thank you. I'm going to turn off the recording, but I'm not going to say goodbye. All righty.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for your trust in us, for your love for this church that motivates you to open yourself up like this for all of us, sharing the love of your family, your boys, for this, your country, for daring to dream that it can be better and that we can do better. Thank you, Joe. The conversation continues, and the work, we're all on our way, but we have a long way to go. Glad you're with us. Each Sunday here at UUCUC, we make space to share the joys and sorrows that are closest to our hearts. It's January. This is entering into one of the darkest times of the year for many people, for many of us, whether it be anxiety about the state of our planet, or it be health conditions of ourselves or our family, it be the political insanity that's going on in our government, in our nation, violence around the world. stresses and unknowns and changes in our lives as human beings, and the heartbreak and the toxicity and the terror of racism in our land, in our lives. Whatever it is, there's a lot going on. How are you? How are you? However you are, it matters. And no feelings are wrong. They are how they are. How are your joys and sorrows? It's not too late to share. We're streaming live. If you'd like to have it read aloud, please send your joys and sorrows to joysandsorrows@uucuc.org. And together now, we will hear our blessing song. Let the
May the long time sun shine upon you. All love surround you, and the pure, pure light that's within you guide your way home. May the long time sun shine upon you. All love surround you, and the pure, pure light that's within you guide your way home. May the long time sun shine upon you. All love surround you, and the pure, pure light that's within you guide your way
Thank you. And please know that if you sent in a joy or sorrow that didn't make it in time to read, or if you're holding joys and sorrows too private to be shared, sorrows too painful to be spoken about just yet, this community is still with you. We are holding you up in all that you're going through. We didn't happen to have any that made it through during this time, but if you would like those that do come through, we will share in this week's EE News for our community to know about and to be able to hold up together. So now, I invite you to take a deep breath. It's not easy being a human being. It's beautiful in so many moments. It's powerful. It's rich. Life is good. But it's not an easy path. I invite you to lift your hand to your heart if you want to feel your pulse and drop your shoulders down. Let us hold our lives and the pulse of this congregation in our thoughts as together we pause, carrying each other with tenderness and gratitude. And may the love of all of us, the connections that stretch out between us like roots of the tree hidden under the ground, but powerful and rich and intertwined, between us and among us and beyond us through the world. And may we always find in our deep connections that which we need most. Please take these next moments to find your own words, to ask what you need, or simply rest and breathe during this moments of meditation as together we take in the words of Dr. King, which will be shared on the screen, to challenge us, to inspire us. And thank you again, Juan. And thank you, Avalon, our AV tech, who put together our slides from the quotes that I chose and put them together with Juan's beautiful music. Thank you. I'd like to share with you a prayer in honor of this occasion of the anniversary of Dr. King's birthday, a prayer delivered by a Reverend Evan Young. He shared this at the 20th anniversary, the 20th annual MLK Silent March at Ohio University, and he began with these words. And I'd like to share the introductory words, and then I'll go into a prayer for us for this day. Reverend Young speaks. When I accepted this invitation to lead prayer, I acknowledged that it felt a bit odd to be a white person offering prayer on this particular day, on this particular occasion, around this particular issue in our lives, and in this historic moment. But I was reminded recently of the words of Nelson Mandela, who said, much more eloquently than I could hope to, that the oppressor and the oppressed must both be liberated. So it is in this humble spirit of acknowledging both my own complicity in and my own oppression by the systems and structures that Dr. King crusaded against, that I invite you to pray with me, each in your own way. For ourselves, for each other, for our communities, local to global and beyond, for any God or power that lives in our lives, in our hearts, and lifts up our spirits, we offer this prayer. This road we have been walking has been long. And like so many roads, it has had its straight stretches and its tortuous stretches and its difficult and dangerous passes, and passes which we are tempted to sink into comfort and forgetfulness. This particular passage we've come to feels in many ways dangerous. We have witnessed the rise of sentiments and systems of white supremacy. We have witnessed the increasing permission felt by many in our country to act on and argue for the otherness, oppression, and marginalization of so many others. And yet we know, because we have been shown by so many before us, that however long, however difficult our road is, there is an end, a destination that is better, more whole, more holy than this place. And we know today in our community that there are many who continue on that path with us, carrying that same vision in their hearts. May our feet be guided on the path to justice. May our hearts be buoyed up by our companions on that path. And may we return with steadfastness and resolve to the work of making that road by walking, so that all may experience the liberation that some have promised, and that is our common vision. And this we pray in all the names we give to that one who has forever been beyond naming, each in our own way. Amen. Blessed be. And now for something completely different from our own Sam Bashirs.
Good morning. This is your friendly weekly reminder that the Coffee House is coming up on February 13th, and there's still time to get your act in. So grab your songbook or storybook or poetry anthology and give us your best shot. Sign-up information is in the weekly e-news. Volunteers are standing by to assist with musical accompaniment or recording. Hope to see you on the 13th.
As Unitarian Universalists, we acknowledge that we are part of the sacred web of life, the web of our connections with each other, with the wider community, and with the world. In that spirit, we share half of our Sunday offering each week with an organization in alignment with our values. This month's shared offering goes to the Refugee Center, which serves all immigrants, political asylum seekers, and refugees, regardless of the country of origin. Currently, the Refugee Center is helping resettle people from Afghanistan. Our church hosted a family of 9 from Afghanistan in November as part of this program. While federal government does provide some financial assistance, it's not enough. The Refugee Center has increased the number of Afghans they agreed to resettle from 30 to 65, and that is taxing their resources. By participating in this month's shared offering, you can help provide financial support for Afghans at risk. At a time when it's most needed, watch the e-news for ways to support newly arriving Afghan families. And our own Immigration Justice Task Force will continue to partner with the Refugee Center in this effort. The offering will now be received.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Juan. That was beautiful. America's Original Sin, Confronting the Racist Within. Dr. King beseeched the white liberals of his day to wake up, to take responsibility. His historic letter, known as Letter to Birmingham Jail, calls out to us today, here. Written on April 16, 1963, while in a harsh, primitive jail cell in Birmingham, Alabama, the first number of lines were written in the margins of the newspaper of that morning, which announced that he had been arrested, and later his letter continued on scraps of paper that a black trustee brought to him. He writes, and I quote, "I must make two confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen counselor or the Ku Klux Klan, but the white moderate. The white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection." End of quote. From decades of history into today, Dr. King's words call to us to keep working for justice, to keep pushing ourselves, to strive to open our own eyes, and the majority of us in this congregation being white liberals, our eyes. He challenges us to strive to see ourselves more honestly, more clearly in what we do, the harm we do, the good we don't do. I stand before you today, the daughter of well-meaning white liberals who worked hard to do what they could to teach their children the inherent worth of every human being, and yet who quietly, unconsciously, with no conscious intent for harm, lived out of pervasive fear and dehumanizing objectification of African Americans. I stand before you, the granddaughter of white supremacists, farmers here in Illinois, Champaign County and White County in southern Illinois, living near sundown towns such as Philo, just 10 miles from here, who, like so many white Americans of their generation, believed intently and religiously in the superiority of the white race, who spoke about it openly, crassly, without filter or shame or self-consciousness or apology, who role modeled fear and hatred toward people of other races, especially African Americans. In other words, I stand before you as your average white American liberal. And though I have for years been trying to hunt down and eradicate the deep imprint of white racism that has pounded loudly through my early life as the result of my upbringing here in Champaign County, I am far from done being released of its evil grip on my nervous system and toxic unconscious assumptions and prejudices so that I can finally be free of it and become the truly kind and loving person I aspire to be. And that Dr. King's legacy challenges each of us, whoever we are, to become. I stand before you also as one who has for over 40 years been the minister of a wide number of African American individuals who over time have greatly helped open my eyes to see more clearly the spiritual violence, and the very real danger and harm my unconscious racist fears and conditioning continue to play on the world in ways that I can't see until I see. I stand here before you as the future grandmother of babies who will be identified as African American. And I worry what kind of world they will be born into and the dangers and the battles that await them from the dominant culture, the white racist dominant culture in this country from people raised like I was. A world still so loaded and dangerous for people of color on every level, including from white liberals. I stand here, like many of you, as a citizen who cares about where we are and where we are headed as a country. It truly frightens me. And there are days it seems that ugly racist white nationalism has flared up stronger than I have seen in a long time. And the silence from those in leadership who we count on can be deafening. And yet, I hold out hope. And I believe that the role of congregations like ours continues to be pivotal in the future of our country. What we do here at UUCUC is essential. How we each look deep inside and demand of ourselves to wake up and to evolve, to step out and speak up is as critical today as it may have ever been. This is our time in history. This is on our shoulders. This is the work of our hands. These are the steps of our feet. These are the consequences of our action and inaction. If not now, when? If not us, who? And so our theme this morning, as we seek to honor the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., is America's original sin, confronting the racist within. I would like to take a moment to offer for us a definition of the word sin so we are all on the same page. The goal in archery is to shoot the arrow and hit as close to the bullseye in the center of the target as possible. The distance between where the arrow actually hits and the bullseye is called, the technical term is sin, S-I-N. It literally means missing the mark. When we speak of Americans' original sin, we are referring to the very first, very large, very wrong trajectory between the vision and the dream and the reality. A course that has led to centuries of suffering and inhumane realities that continue on through history to today. The original vision was an inspired one, a radical one. If one transforms the sexist language and ideology of the day. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights, and that among these are life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness. Unquote. Words found, of course, in our own nation's Declaration of Independence. And yet, even the very hours as this profoundly inspirational vision of nation was being conceived, the same generation, the same new nation committed the first great evil of its birth. The virtual genocide of the native peoples of this land through military campaigns and disease-borne extermination. The near destruction of indigenous population and the insatiable greed of the conquerors led to the second great evil of our nation, the slave trade. Kidnapped Africans made into property died by the millions along with their Native Americans, brothers and sisters. And those who survived were forced to endure on the most cruel forms of slavery in human history. These founding events of the American nations are not just historical, they are filled with theological meaning. The systemic physical and spiritual violence done first to indigenous people and then to Black Africans was the first original sin of the American nations. In other words, the United States of America was literally conceived in iniquity. Whatever else is right about America has not and does not erase that original sin. The good things about this country and the reasons many have come here need not be denied, but the brutal founding facts of nationhood must be faced up to. Like any sin, this one must be dealt with. Missing the mark is an understatement. For the sake of our integrity, for the sake of the legacy, that original sin is still with us and causes untold suffering through our nation and its citizens. America's racial history has affected us all in profound ways. It still shapes our national experience and obstructs the fulfillment of our professed values. None more than one stated by the words that all are created equal. Our country's face is dramatically revealed in the continued devastation of Black, Native, and other communities of color. It is revealed in the legacy of the benefit still enjoyed by most white people. It is revealed in the fear and anger felt by many whites facing shrinking economic realities and the temptation to scapegoat racial minorities. Many of us have heard the ancient story of the Good Samaritan, who is journeying along and comes across someone who has been battered and beaten and robbed, left broken and alone on the side of the road. We know how the tale unfolds, how the Good Samaritan reached out to this person in desperate need, bound up their wounds, took them to a place of safety and care, and paid for all their needs for the foreseeable future. Those of us who are white need to understand that our history, our legacy in this country from our forebears is not the heritage of the Good Samaritan, even though there are many white individuals who have given their lives to the cause of justice. Nonetheless, as the dominant culture laced with the history of racism in our nation, we must understand once and for all that as a culture and a people, ours has been the role of the robber in this story. The story of the robber as it's been laid out against the American story. Those of us who are white are the ones who have benefited most from that robbery. However removed from the actual events our lives may seem. We are the ones who benefited from an innocent traveler being brutally beaten, stripped of all he had, including his pride, his dignity, his life, as he was left for dead. Despite all the denial of all the history books for generations which make us out to be the hero in the story, we are not. Only when we are able to finally see through all the misleading fairy tales of strong, brave cowboys saving the day by fighting the less than human Indians, only when we find the courage to face our history head on, to see it as it really was, only when we are able to understand the extent that those of us who are white have benefited from the destruction and oppression of others, will we be ready and able to know how we might then bind up the wounds of our neighbors, what we might do then in the name of justice, and at the very minimal, how we can stop doing harm. Only as we face the racist mindsets in our own personal history and our families, unconscious and conscious biases and prejudices, will we be able to find healing and offer right relationship that we as a people, who are all the people, so desperately need. In my own tradition, there is a powerful concept of repentance. The biblical meaning of repentance is to turn around. It means far more than feeling sorry or even guilty. It is an action word in this context. It means to change your own internal understanding of the reality around you and your place in this reality. It means to change your behavior by turning and heading in a new direction. I believe that here it means to strive to break free of the denial in our role in helping to perpetuate racist institutions, norms, attitudes, and behaviors, however implicitly or explicitly. To realize the benefits that we who identify as white continue to receive from them. To realize how deeply our own fears, biases, assumptions, stereotypes, and lack of awareness continue to fuel them, enable them in our world. Racism is often described as a problem of prejudice. However, you would have to look pretty far and wide to find a human being who didn't have some kind of racial prejudice. Prejudices are learned very young and are an inherent part of many family cultures. I've heard it said, as Joe and I were talking about earlier, that those who study human culture's behavior say that everyone is in some way racially prejudiced. Does this mean that everyone is racist? Those on the front lines of anti-racism work are in agreement on this front. No. Racism is more than bigotry. Racism is more than racial prejudice. It is more than having distorted opinions about people of other races. As Joe and I had talked about, racism is prejudice backed by power. It is the power to enrich it is the power to enrich one's prejudice. Racism is prejudice plus power. White racism is the uneven, unfair distribution of power, privilege, land, and material goods favoring white people. Racism is a system in which people of color as a group are exploited and oppressed by white people as a group. Too many white people today still believe that we're all given equal opportunities and start from a level playing field. We often don't see the benefits we continue to receive from being a member in the dominant culture whose prejudices carry great power. We don't see the benefits. We claim they're not there. I think power and benefits are like good health. We tend to take our health for granted when it is good. It is only when we lose it or don't have it to begin with that we realize it's important to our security and our quality of life. Anti-racism training teaches that a solid step on the path of repentance, of healing, is to become as aware as we can of the benefits of those of us who are white receive from how power is distributed, both in the past and in the present in our society. Paul Cavell, in his book, Uprooting Racism, How White People Can Work for Racial Justice, has put together a white privilege checklist to help us decrease our denial and increase our awareness. You can find a link to this at the bottom of our online order of service. It's also in this week's e-news. And I highly recommend that you and your family take some time with it today or tomorrow on the occasion of celebrating the anniversary of Dr. King's birthday and see what is revealed to you about your access to white privileges that you might not have been realized before. There is an old truth that I believe in that says awareness is 70% of the battle. And I have found this remarkably true. To become aware of the white privilege that so many of us, those of us who are white, all live with, is powerful and important and essential. We who have been raised on the long legacies of white supremacy and who have benefited from white racism every day in our lives are called to repent, to turn direction, to turn around and choose new paths of even greater awareness of the impact to the origins of our nation. Americans' original sin of racism must be faced in a way that, with few exceptions, most white citizens of predominantly white churches, as individuals and as a group, have never fully done. Some have never begun. May we as a congregation and as people of faith, each in our own way, recommit ourselves to breaking through our own defenses of denial and opening our eyes of self-awareness. May we make new decisions to further educate ourselves on the continuing impact of our nation's original sin. For it is only as we see ourselves more clearly, and as Dr. King pleads through his preaching to the white liberal communities of his time, that we take responsibility and face the history and the legacy of our forebears, the more we confront our own racial fear and prejudices, the more clearly we can see better the real anguish, the deep ways we impact those persons of color around us, the more we can see the harm that we do, the more we are able to stop it. The more boldly we will be able to speak truth, to hold accountable systemic racist places of power, the more we can, at long last, pave the way to build a more inclusive and a more just, beloved community in the here and now. It matters greatly that we each dare to choose to face full on our nation's shameful past. And we who are white, to face the legacy, the social, psychological conditioning of white supremacy and white racism that was imposed and printed on us by our forebears. It is essential for the work of our lives. It is essential for the sake of our neighbors of color, for the sake of the next generation, for the sake of the future of our country and our world. Amen. May it be so.
Before extinguishing the chalice, reflect on these words from a poem by Amanda Gorman, a young Black writer who spoke at the Biden inauguration. She writes, "You will be told this is not a problem, not your problem. You will be told now is not the time for change to begin. You were told that you cannot win. But the point of protest isn't winning. It's holding fast to the promise of freedom, even when fast victory is not promised." And now we extinguish our chalice with these words by the UU minister, Reverend Elizabeth Selly Jones. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together.